Hi, I'm Katie.
Hi.
I'm Preston. Welcome to Holy Watermelon Podcast.
Right? I mean, we can tell everyone how excited we are to talk about Islam today.
Yeah.
Give them a little preview, and then the song will kick in, and they'll go.
So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand.
Atheist and agnostic as well as many times.
Hi, I'm Katie.
Hi, I'm Preston.
And welcome to the Holy Watermelon Podcast.
So this is the third installment in our mini-series of specific religious studies. And we're going to look into the continuation of the saga that is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
The Abrahamic boys.
The trilogy that culminates with Muhammad.
Or arguably Joseph Smith, but that's a different episode.
It's a different trilogy. It's like when finally Disney says, the sequel trilogy wasn't that good. And everyone's like, yeah, you're right. And then they come out with another one that's less popular.
But today, you're right, is all about Islam, the most recent of the Abrahamic, air quotes, Western religious practices.
Of course. A ridiculous label of Western when, it's still Asian.
We'll say this every episode for the next 5 episodes, that we
Right.
don't like the labels, but it helps, I think. It's a common term, I guess.
There's a little piece of me that thinks that Hinduism is more Western than Islam is. Which we'll address when we dive a little deeper into Hinduism.
Next week. So you want to start with a little bit of the history, Preston, of Islam.
Yeah, so there's this foundational figure. I think most people are at least familiar with the name Muhammad. If you haven't met somebody or heard of somebody with the name Muhammad at all, you've definitely been living under a rock. It is the most common name on the whole world.
Is it really?
It's the most common male name. Yeah.
In the world? Cool.
Yeah. It's a popular tradition to name your kid after the prophet if he's
you
a
must
boy.
know Muhammad Ali, the boxer. Not
Right? I don't
Caliph.
know personally, obviously.
No, but you've heard.
Yeah. And again, you'd have to be living under a rock
To not know.
If you're listening to this podcast, you've definitely heard of a Muhammad somewhere. That's the reality. And most of that, the reason for the popularity of his name is this figure, Muhammad, who is the founder of what we know as Islam. He was born around the 600-ish AD, and he was a reasonably successful and well-respected trader, merchant, and he was approached by the angel Gabriel and said, hey, there's some things you need to help me change. And Muhammad took that message from God that he received through Gabriel and made little changes.
Turned it into a whole new religion.
Yeah.
Which I think this is an interesting point. We have it in our notes that Muhammad, and just like Moses and Jesus, didn't go out to start a new religion. He thought of himself as a reformer. And so often these stories are because the current era has it wrong in some way, shape, or form. And we get this new iteration, or God saying, hey, you forgot about all this stuff, or here's some new notes for you to go off of.
Yeah. There's a very strong parallel between him and those former figures. One of the bigger differences, though, with Muhammad is that he wasn't surrounded by people who worshipped one God to the same level that Jesus was a Jew preaching to faithful-ish Jews.
Monotheistic people, yeah.
Yeah. And Moses was teaching Israelites who, though they were familiar with and maybe a little too comfortable with Egyptian gods, they were also largely familiar with Yahweh, the God of Israel. Muhammad didn't have that same benefit. He had a lot of people in his community that were worshiping a wide variety of idolatrous gods. So his efforts to reform were a little trickier, but as he gained people's trust by one means or another, he was able to convert them to a monotheistic faith.
Nice. One of the, I guess, the mystical part of Muhammad's story is that Gabriel revealed the Quran to him, the religious book, and Muhammad was completely illiterate, so the story goes. So he wrote down the Quran from divine revelation.
See, what was always told to me was he didn't write down anything himself.
He just repeated it enough times that...
Yeah, just told his inner circle and they wrote it down.
I mean, if you're illiterate, yeah.
It makes it a lot easier
to dictate.
It makes this story more palatable to have an illiterate person not write it. You know? But it's interesting that there are textual variants to the Quran that seem as though they are coming from different traditions of different scribes. Though there is currently, just as there is with the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible, there is a standard accepted Quranic text that everybody sticks to today. And the variants are ignored completely by literally everybody except scholars on the subject.
Yes, I was going to say that the Quran is, I mean, you're right, it's available in probably almost every language in the world because Islam is a very widespread religion. My goodness. But because it was revealed in Arabic and written originally in Arabic, that is considered the approved text. And if you go to a mosque, again, I'm sure you can probably get mosque services in every language, but predominantly I believe it's in Arabic because that's the divine.
Well, even the Catholic Church was really reluctant to have Mass in any language other than Latin until the 60s, wasn't it?
It was quite late,
it's like super recent. And so like maybe 600 years from now, Muslims will be a lot more comfortable having their services in the vernacular. If that's not, I'm sure that is the case in some circles, but I think that'll be a lot more widespread when somewhere around that same timeline in religious age, you know?
In my brain, and I don't know, I should probably look into this, but where we are, you can get church services, you know, predominantly we see it in Asian languages. Oh, there's a Korean service at 2 p.m. and an English service at 10 a.m. So I feel like that's probably common in North America where you'd get an Arabic service at one time and maybe an English service at a different time.
Probably.
Again, I don't know. I'm just guessing, but that would seem reasonable, especially because Islam is an evangelical religion. They are actively looking to convert people to it.
Yeah. But the Quran is not the Quran unless it has the Arabic text.
Okay.
Everything else is just a translation of the Quran. And it's actually super important to most Muslims that I speak with that is deliberately pointed out in the title.
That's how you, yeah. One thing that's interesting about Islam is that it's very anti-idolatry.
Yeah, hugely. Both Moses and Jesus were hugely opposed to idolatry. A little detail that you'll find some Christians forgot about somehow. And Islam and, well, specifically Muhammad spoke out strongly and harshly against idolatry, following that same ancient tradition. And so there's a lot of cool things that have come out because of that practice.
So there are some good things about Islam being anti-idolatrous, and then there are some bad things that have come from that as well.
Indeed, there is. The art of Islam is really cool. I always think first of word art. Their calligraphy to represent figures is really quite awesome. Almost every time. Every time I've seen it, it is great. And as Katie has mentioned to me before, the geometry and the drawings, the patterns, all of that comes up as art when you can't be drawing people and animals for fear of them being treated as idols is actually really quite awesome as well.
Yeah.
What's the bad side?
I love how you left me with the bad stuff. So to be clear, I guess idolatry in like a Christian context would be pictures of Jesus or Mary, or I don't think there's too many iterations of God except in the Sistine Chapels. But so Muslims refrain from pictures of God, which is already quite rare, but of Muhammad as well.
And that's caused some problems.
And that has
for
caused
us.
some problems. So most notably, the Charlie Hebdo magazine in Paris drew a likeness of Muhammad
several times.
And there was a bombing, I believe.
There was bombings, there was shootings, there was stabbings of other people related to the sharing of those images, which sucks.
And to be clear, this is extremist behavior.
Yeah,
I think most Muslims would condemn that, even if they obviously don't agree with pictures of Muhammad being created or distributed. Most Muslims would not kill someone over it.
Right.
They might send a disgruntled letter, which
Please stop this.
fair enough.
Yeah.
You should all write the occasional disgruntled letter.
Right. As far as I've observed, most Muslims are far more concerned with self-governing rather than governing the actions of others.
But that is extreme, but I don't want to say good, but
It is a visible example
Thank
of
you.
the thing.
of idolatry at its worst.
So, among all of the things that Muhammad taught, anti-idolatry was a big deal. He helped convert an awful lot of people in the region to Islam, and a lot of people smashed their idols. And I've heard reports that a lot of these chunks of idols are in the Kaaba in Mecca.
Oh, interesting.
I have also heard that that is not true.
I got really excited.
So one way or the other, I straight up don't know. But I do know that a lot of people for quite a long time have been with
Idol smashing.
they've been not worshiping idols, which is kind of cool. Limiting your worship to a sky daddy is, even though it looks nonsensical to an awful lot of people, it makes a lot more sense than worshiping a chunk of gold or iron or wood that you would have in your home.
Mm-hmm. That is interesting to me. I just finished a book on evangelical Christianity, and I can see how idolatry is beneficial in the sense that it helps you. This is going to sound not the way I want it to sound, but it helps you suspend disbelief, essentially. And it was a really good book.
Because it's a thing that's there.
Yeah, this book was talking about how you basically have to like circumvent thought processes in prayer specifically. So I can see how having a physical or visual thing can help with that. So it's an interesting an interesting rule in Islam that idols are not to be used.
This prohibition does date back at least as far as Moses. There's also stories written long after the time of Abraham of him also going out and smashing all of the idols he could get his hands on.
Rage smash!
So it's not a specifically Muhammad thing. This is a strong Judaic tradition.
Yes. I'm just curious why it pops up in Christianity then. Especially, and I think and my brain especially goes to Catholicism, but
the idolatry that we
episode.
see in Christianity looks like it comes from Roman pluralism, the huge polytheistic
pantheon
miasm that is the Roman tradition.
Interesting.
Which, of course, isn't even original to them.
Fair. Okay. No, good answer. Now, I love Islam because they have the easiest summary of beliefs ever.
It's a nice short checklist, and it's a solid, almost universally agreed upon checklist.
So the 5 pillars of Islam, 5 points we're going to run through, and I wish all other religions made it this easy on us to research and reiterate.
Right.
So I will start. The first pillar of Islam is, and I'm going to try the Arabic.
You're going to try pronouncing the word?
I am. I'm
Sure.
going to embarrass myself.
I think we should do it.
Okay. The first one is called Shahada, or the profession of faith. And it is 2 statements of faith that you are expected to verbalize, but also believe that, and this is what makes you a Muslim. So the first statement is there is no God but God. And the second statement is Muhammad is the messenger of God. And these statements are said during prayer. They're also the first thing said, presumably if you're born to a Muslim family, the first thing said to you when you're born, and the last thing you hear before you pass. So they're pretty important statements in the Muslim faith. And I believe it's also part of the equivalent of a Muslim baptism. So whether you're converting or converting or convermin. What?
What now?
I said converting or confirming.
Oh, okay.
Oh, the look you gave me. Converting or confirming. This is critical in that point. Your disgust is making me laugh.
You're trying to be highbrow.
All right, why don't you take on point number 2, deflect the attention.
The second pillar of Islam is prayer, or salat. Prayer is done several times a day, almost universally in Islam, because there is difference of opinion. There are set times where specific prayers are to be given, and that's part of Muslim piety. You can't really go without it.
Piety? Not piety?
I've always heard it piety. I don't think I've ever even heard piety.
No,
if you were pious,
I guess
you are exhibiting piety.
Now I'm second guessing myself. Okay, I'll take it. Sorry.
We'll be
Muslim
okay.
piety.
What now? I think I was done
Yeah,
on prayer.
You should probably mention Mecca.
Oh, yes. Also, when praying, Muslims are meant to be facing Mecca. That's kind of a big deal, that Mecca is the holy place. This is a tradition that's not exclusive to Muslims. Jews typically orient their synagogues facing Jerusalem, which is not so distant from Mecca as to see much of a visible distance. In one community, both buildings are usually going to be facing pretty much exactly the same way, which is kind of cool, though it's obvious that these two communities are different in many other ways. Where we are in North America, in Canada, that is southeast. I had to think way too hard about my directions on the compass.
I mean, anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, you're facing east. It just depends how north or south you're facing.
Exactly.
So in Canada, you face southeast.
Yeah.
I guess you'd probably have to get pretty far south in the States to just face pure east.
Yeah.
But
I think so.
anyway.
I mean, in Florida, it might be.
Because Saudi Arabia is pretty close to the equator, if I'm not mistaken.
It's close, but it's not super close. It's
Okay.
I mean, it's way closer compared to us.
Right.
I think it's technically tropical.
I can't picture where the equator runs, but
The equator hits the bottom of West Africa.
okay, then yeah. Okay.
That much I remember.
There you go.
Geography's not my thing.
No.
This is my thing.
That's all that matters. Number 3 is zakat, or almsgiving. And Muslims are expected to pay a tithe. This is pretty common in, I think, all
Pretty
religions.
much all religions.
Muslims, for the most part, I think the standard is 10%. And I know in Christian traditions that can vary. Some have a set percentage and some it's just kind of what you can afford or what you are moved to give. The other piece of almsgiving is Muslims are expected to be charitable and give to the poor and help out those in need.
Not terribly foreign ideas.
No. It's just how to be a good person 101.
Right?
In 5 steps.
The fourth pillar of Islam is fasting. This is...
Some. He's not going to say it. Some.
Yep. I actually didn't mean to say it. And now I've completely lost my momentum.
I'm sorry. The month of fasting.
Yeah. The fourth pillar of Islam is fasting. Psalm is the word. And it's most visible in the month of Ramadan, a whole month set aside for daytime fasting. As long as the sun is up from dawn to dusk, you will not eat anything. Drinking anything is also forbidden, as well as sometimes other pleasurable activities are also forbidden.
I don't get it.
Many people will abstain from sex during the daytime, or sometimes even the whole month,
Wow.
according to some reports.
So a lot like, I won't say a lot like Lent, but similar to Lent, more strict than Lent.
More strict than Lent. Instead of just one thing, it's a whole bunch of things.
And it culminates in the celebration of Eid, which is a really big holiday in Islam. So
Much in the
like
same way that Lent culminates in Easter.
Easter.
Though Eid and Easter, I don't think they have much in common, really.
I know there's a big, well,
I mean, there's a
a big feast.
You're right.
I mean, that's all a good holiday needs is food.
Right.
Food and family.
It's hard to enjoy a holiday when there's not a meal, you know?
Yeah. Who can not fast?
So everybody should be fasting when it's reasonable to do so. Except, of course, those who it's not reasonable for, like the sick, the elderly, or also sometimes the very young should probably not be fasting as well.
The other thing people should know, the other thing about Ramadan is that it changes every year because Muslims follow a lunar calendar, so their months are shorter. So Ramadan changes, I think it goes back a week every year. And if you're in North America, that can suck when Ramadan's in the summer and our days are really long because you are fasting from sunrise to sunset. It's a lot easier in the winter, like right now, where our days are very, very short.
Yeah, the month of Ramadan is a lot easier when the sun sets at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, dinner time.
I thought it was really interesting to learn that the month of Ramadan is named as it is. Ramadan is a name of God. And so an awful lot of people will feel uncomfortable with you just calling the month Ramadan. It's the month of Ramadan, if you want to be most correct.
You're saying the month of God.
I mean, more or less. Ramadan doesn't mean God, but is one of his titles.
Okay.
And he has many titles.
Doesn't he? Fifth pillar, the last pillar of Islam, is called the Hajj, or the pilgrimage. And you are expected as a Muslim once in your life, if financially feasible. So they're reasonable human beings. If you don't.
If you can't do it,
don't put yourself into poverty to do the Hajj. But you're expected once in your lifetime to visit Mecca during the 12th lunar month. And during that time, pilgrims are given 2 white sheets to wear, and that's to put everyone on the same, I want to say, economical footing, so that there's no classes based off of possessions or garments.
Make everybody look like equals.
Make everyone look like equals under the eyes of God. And during that time, they circled the Kaaba in Mecca, which is this big black square stone that Preston mentioned, and
the square isn't stone. It's a box built around a stone.
Oh, interesting. I thought you can't see the stone though.
No, it's presumably sitting in the corner of the building.
There's a big black box, and
it's a big box.
It's a big black box, and you are supposed to circle it 7 times.
I like to imagine a traffic circle where you need, like, you're obviously going to start on the outside of the circle on your way in. And hopefully by the end or the middle of the third
or
lap,
fourth pass,
you need to get close to that middle, because everyone wants to get to the middle, right?
Touch
Everyone wants
Kaaba.
to sneak a touch or more. I don't know. But remember, there's witnesses. There's not going to be a lot more.
There's millions of people.
This place is super crowded all the time. And then hopefully by the middle of your 5th lap, you're on your way out, because you might be forced into an 8th lap.
There's also other, what's the word I'm looking for, practices or rituals that you perform during the Hajj. You walk between 2 mountains because Muhammad did, and obviously there's different prayers and and things like that. And yeah, millions of people visit Mecca every year. The city, I think, quadruples in size. It's actually like a big infrastructural problem that Saudi Arabia has to deal with, is all these Muslims showing up every year. And people do pilgrimages throughout the year, but it's not your Hajj. You have to go at this specific time for it to be done. And it's a big rite of passage, sounds like the right term, but typically it happens when you're older in life. So it's kind of, we think of rites of passage happening sort of in your teens and in your 20s, but
this is something you have to save up for.
Yeah, you have to. So yes, you have to save up for your Hajj. I had a friend and her parents completed it probably 4 or 5 years ago. And all their kids are adults, and they were just at a point in their life where, they were financially able to do it, but it was an exciting thing, right? She told me that her parents had completed and was excited to share that. Now, there's an unofficial sixth pillar of Islam, and these next few topics might sound scary to our viewers, but we assure you they're not. We've just made them scary.
Culturally, we have allowed them to become scary to us.
Made them far more than they are. So what is the sixth pillar, Preston?
The sixth pillar.
Unofficial sixth pillar.
Yeah, it's not really a pillar, but it's kind of,
if you read it,
it's a real thing.
Yeah.
It's important. Yeah. It's just not foundational to the faith.
Yeah.
Is the principle of jihad, which is, for most people, just an internal struggle to be more pious, to be more righteous. But there's enough people that you've heard the word before use it as a drive for a holy conflict between people.
Now, the word actually means striving or struggling, and as you said, it can mean a multitude of things. You struggling to be a better Muslim, the struggle to evangelize or convert people, because it is an evangelical religion. There are two, I want to say, schools of thought. There's the jihad of the pen, which is literally writing or debating your faith. And then there's jihad of the sword, which is this idea that Westerners are afraid of, right? That a jihad is coming. Now, jihad is meant to be defensive only, but of course we are humans and we can twist things.
And sometimes we're just offensive people.
Right, and sometimes we're just assholes. So, we hear the term jihad and we think of 9/11, and, in their minds, it probably was the defensive jihad of the sword. And as Westerners, we have a different idea of that. But most Muslims, this idea of jihad is very much internal struggle, worst case scenario, a debate or strongly worded letter in defense of essentially your right to practice religion. It's a debate on freedom of religion.
Absolutely. I think we had Sharia next.
Yes, so another scary term to us Westerners is Sharia.
The idea that somebody else's laws could be imposed on us sounds awful. And yet, that's exactly the way we've been living
forever.
That's human life.
That's human life. Yes, so, I just said it. Humans are fallible. We can interpret these laws any way we want. We can interpret them in really scary ways. We can make them mandatory, or we can make them guidelines. Like, there's this whole thing. And man, so often we hear, there's going to be Sharia law, or so-and-so wants to bring in Sharia law. It's literally, and I'm not saying there isn't some, stuff in there that isn't good, but it's literally like how to live a more pious life.
How to be a moral person.
How to be a better Muslim. And how to relate to God better and be a more ethical human being.
Ultimately, that's the essence of it.
Yeah.
There's loads of specific little things, but that's the essence.
It covers everything from financial transactions to domestic sort of family law stuff to like literally it's honestly kind of boring.
Right? And for all you Christians who are worried about it, the Bible says don't let the sun set on a debt. So our current bi-weekly pay schedule is anti-biblical. So if you're worried about religious laws, let's worry about some of the other ones.
Yeah. And like I said, it's not like there aren't, absolutely it mentions stoning, but you need 4 witnesses before you can stone someone. And it's for, heinous crimes,
And the Muslims didn't invent stoning. That's very well established tradition in Israel that we can see. And they didn't invent it either. I mean, it's just a really effective way to kill people.
It's very interactive.
Right? It's a group activity. It brings the community together.
Oh, wow.
All right. And another scary word that we've heard on TV, because that's really where you're going to be hearing it most, is
social
fatwas.
media.
The idea of fatwas kind of got sensationalized about 15-ish years ago on TV. Or at least that's where I first experienced it. And when. And you see things like this person put out a fatwa on this other relative and now they're gonna die. Like fatwa is somehow synonymous with honor killings, when that's not the case at all. A fatwa is a non-binding legal opinion, which can include, I think this person should be put to death. But it's such a broad category of speech.
I also love that it's non-binding.
Right? And especially if you have no real authority.
Yeah.
Like if you're just some dude with a BA sitting in somebody's basement, then your authority to call somebody else to death is 0. But if you're a well-respected imam or a caliph, you have a lot of authority. And even though technically your fatwas are non-binding, you're going to have a lot more people concerned about what you have to say and your opinions. And usually, the more conspicuous of a person you are in the public eye, the less likely you are to call somebody to be put to death without them having broken more than one very important law.
And I would say, especially in North America, we hear about atrocities elsewhere in the world where it's probably more likely. But yeah, your average person in North America calling a fatwa is...
It's not happening very often.
Just like a neckbeard in their basement.
Right.
That's upset about the keyboard warrior. Upset about something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So don't worry about jihad or Sharia or fatwas. Is basically...
They're not going to affect your life unless you're a Muslim. And then you'll know how to deal with that because you'll have been properly educated.
Yes. And reading on Sharia, there are Sharia councils. And it's basically, I think, honestly, it's more of an advisory thing. And obviously this would deal more predominantly with about Sharia women's council. So let's say you want to divorce your husband, you would go to a Sharia council because divorce is, I don't want to say it's not permissible, but it's frowned upon. And it's frowned upon in Christianity too. So don't get all huffy with me. And this would sort of be the council that would sort of give you that blessing to have a divorce because your husband's an asshole. And that's kind of how it runs. And that happens in Christianity too. And I presume Judaism as well. That they say, no, you're fine. God won't be mad at you for divorcing your wife-beaten husband. And they go, okay, thank you. And then they get their divorce and everyone's happy. And that's kind of how, especially in the West, how Sharia would play a role. The same as bringing your issues to a church elder.
Yeah, pretty much. What are we on to now?
We are on day-to-day beliefs and what it looks like to be a Muslim in day-to-day life.
So as somebody who likes food, that's usually where I lean to. Beliefs being the most visible is how people's religion affects their dietary practices. And so you'll often see labels in your grocery store, depending on where you live, of course, of halal yogurt and halal foods. And halal is the opposite of haram. Halal is permissible. Haram is forbidden.
And we'll talk about food first, but there's lots of things that are halal.
It doesn't, yeah, it's
yeah,
not
halal
just
and
food.
haram are not just for food. Also, if you're a restaurant owner, like, man, just make your meat halal. I don't know why.
Because people like food that's not just restricted to that category.
But like, it doesn't affect me if meat is halal, but how many more customers would you get if your meat was halal? That's
a great
always blown my
question.
mind, because I have some Muslim friends who are like, well, I can't eat there because it's not halal, but here's the list of restaurants
Bacon.
I can go to.
So many people love bacon. I mean, that's
true.
Pork chops, staple of American diets.
So what Preston is getting at is that pork is haram. Just, I mean, the term's different, but just like in Judaism, pork is not permitted to be eaten. There are a bunch of other meats that are not supposed to be eaten.
Alligator, no good.
Shark, no good.
Dog, no good.
Monkeys, bad.
Straight up awful. Okay, actually, like, I know the restriction is don't eat carnivores. I mean, there's more restrictions than
Carnivorous
that.
animal, yeah.
But I feel like monkeys, it's probably a little bit not just them being carnivorous, but also them being like too familiar to humanity.
Fair. Also dogs.
Right?
Not that dogs are like humans, but I have a dog on my lap right now, and I don't think I could, that we joke about our chicken legs.
As far as
But
I
I
know,
can eat her.
the prohibition against eating dogs
It's the
and
carnivores.
jackals and whatnot is the carnivore thing, that they're just kind of dirty. I mean, you see a dog lick another dog's butt, and if you're in the middle of writing rules about eating, dog's going to make that list.
Insects are also haram
Yes.
on the list of meats to not eat. And back to halal meat, so halal chicken, halal beef, it has to be slaughtered a certain way. Blood is haram, so all the blood needs to be drained. And I believe a prayer is said, this is very similar to kosher meat, same thing. It has to be slaughtered a certain way, all the blood needs to be drained.
Yeah. The rules aren't exactly the same. The list isn't exactly the same, but they are awfully close.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing being haram does not make it, I was going to say one thing being haram does not make it kosher. That is absolutely factual.
Yes.
But also one thing being halal doesn't mean it's kosher, and vice versa as
Right.
well.
Truth.
What else is haram?
There's lots of things that are haram. But I say that, and it's pretty standard to most religions. So other consumables that are haram, there's no alcohol, no cigarettes or drugs. With that, nothing addictive either. So no gambling or lotteries.
Did you know coffee is considered haram by many Muslims?
Interesting. But then there's like Turkey, where
It's a huge deal.
a huge deal in quite a Muslim country.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
when coffee first became a really popular thing, it caused all kinds of arguments because coffee is a stimulant,
Mm-hmm.
and being a stimulant is actually the issue that a lot of people felt that it was inappropriate to consume.
Now, asterisk on this conversation, every
There's going to be loads of
every
variety
religious
of opinion.
person is going to be on a different scale. We'll get into clothing briefly, but I know a ton of Muslim ladies that don't cover their hair. I have one friend who won't eat pork but will drink alcohol. I know some who aren't too concerned if meat's halal. They'll have it, they'll go to
Bacon on
they'll
a
go to
cheeseburger.
Popeyes and have a sandwich and not worry that it's halal or not, as long as it's not pork. So there's with all of this asterisk spectrum.
Right. There's loads of variety in practice.
Right.
We're all people, and we tend to do things differently from the people around us.
Yep.
On an awful lot of things.
Yep. So other things that are haram, so certain clothing is haram. Islam encourages modesty, just like Christianity, just like Judaism. Again, that looks different for everyone. We have, like you said, women who don't wear hijabs. We have women who do wear hijabs. We have women that wear niqabs and burqas and everything on that scale. But generally, clothes shouldn't be tight-fitting and skin is covered.
Don't deliberately entice sexual fantasies.
Oh, I roll.
Right.
But yes.
That is part of the philosophy behind it.
But there's an mega eye roll here. Another piece of clothing, I guess another piece of clothing that is haram and an asterisk is not ostentatious makeup or jewelry. Not that you can't wear makeup or that you can't wear jewelry.
Just don't
but you
overdo
just
it.
gotta decide where the overdoing it line is. And with that as well, in sort of the decor ostentation, they even say that your home should be decorated modestly and not overdone.
But what if I love having gold and bejeweled doorknobs?
Then you're probably Persian.
But I'm not.
Are you a Kardashian?
No.
I say that with all the love in the world and appreciation for the opulence of Persian decor. I really liked the point you made about the burqa earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And I would love for you to, that would make sense to talk about
In
now.
a previous attempt to record this episode, I had mentioned a little bit about where that burqa comes from, or at least how it's validated. It's not a strictly religious garment, though we do pretty much only see Muslim women wearing it. It's more of a localized cultural feature. You see Muslims all over the world who don't wear it, so it's clearly not explicitly prescribed in the Quran or the Hadiths.
We should talk about the Quran and the Hadiths. We forgot.
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
Don't you worry. We'll get back to that.
Okay.
All right. And so in the writings of Islam, which we'll get to in greater detail here in a minute, there is a hadith that Muhammad said that a woman should not be alone in the same part of a tent with a stranger, more or less. I'm summarizing for sake of speed. And that there's this covering of the whole body is meant to be that separation when a woman goes out in public, because there's strange men everywhere.
Everywhere. So
And
strange.
Men historically have sucked, have been bad neighbors,
Truth.
bad to men, bad to women.
Truth.
And so that protection for women, as much as it is protection, because women have had bad experiences with men regardless of what they're wearing,
Double truth.
choosing not to promote the feelings that would cause more bad things to happen
Eye roll.
is, I mean, it sucks to have it forced upon you. That's a reality. But to elect to wear it, as many women do, is their choice and can be helpful for meeting the standards of the community.
Now, we don't often see burqas in North America. There are slight variations on these. So if you see a woman who has the lower half of her face covered, chances are it's a niqab. Burqa is literally like a vent over your eyes. Like, you can't
It's a
even see
whole
that.
tent.
It's a whole thing. So if you see someone head to toe in North America or, Western Europe, chances are it's just a niqab. And I would argue more often than not, it's elected. I mean, of course, lots of women have dick husbands regardless of your religion. So I'm sure some of them are forced to, but most women that wear niqabs, if you ask, they've chosen to for modesty reasons. And same with the hijab. And then, we were talking earlier, you said, what do I think of when I think of the burqa? I think of the Taliban in Afghanistan, where it absolutely was enforced by law. And honestly, some of it's cultural. You'll get Muslims all over the world that don't cover up in that way. And it really just depends on how you were raised. I know a devout Muslim man, and he thinks hair is sexual. And we had this conversation during the Judaism episode. Preston thinks hair is sexual too. So
you make it sound like I'm so bad for thinking
just
that
a
way.
predator. Oh, hair.
The burqa, it's a localized regional thing. It's a lot more of a cultural identity than it is a religious
Preston was saying, it's a regional cultural thing. And there's, places in the world that are predominantly Muslim. I think Indonesia's one where you wouldn't see women in hijabs at all.
I don't think so.
Yeah, especially here in North America. Obviously, if wearing a hijab, you're probably prescribed to Islam, but I'm sure there's dozens of women, hundreds of women that prescribe to Islam, and you'd never know.
Yeah, for sure.
There was another point I was going to make.
Men are also required to dress modestly. It's not just a women thing.
Absolutely.
However, the standard is different because, yay, men.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say. So the hijab is worn for modesty, but it's also a reminder of God's presence, just like the yarmulke. And women, whatever their choice of garment is, will cover up for men that don't belong to their family. So when they're at home, their husbands will see them, their sons will see them, their brothers will see them, their dad will see them, and any other women. And any other women, right? So I went to a friend's Muslim wedding and not a single hijab was to be found because it was all women. It was all the women's, at her actual wedding, there were hijabs, but there's Muslim weddings. Man, what a party. And the events leading up to the week before, the 3 events I went to in addition to her wedding, that were all women only. There wasn't a scarf in sight.
That's kind of nice.
Yeah,
the freedom to choose when to wear it is a very real thing.
Yes.
And it's a thing I can appreciate.
Now, we danced around. We should have talked about the Quran earlier and the Hadith, but you brought it up, and now it seems like a good way to.
Not sure how we didn't talk about it earlier when we were talking about Muhammad. Kind of a big deal.
Well, we talked about the Quran being divinely revealed to him.
Yeah. So the angel Gabriel brought to Muhammad the message of Allah. And, of course, that included many instances of how to correct the course that these people were on, either away from, just pretty much mostly away from traditions of regionalized idols, and also other ways on how to be better Muslims once they had accepted that faith. And in addition to the Quran, which is the singular authoritative volume of scripture, there is also the Hadiths, which are, they're collectively described as a thing, but it's several hadiths. They are sayings of mostly Muhammad that are reported through a chain of authoritative figures, and then eventually written down. And so usually when you read it, you'll have Muhammad said to so-and-so, who said to so-and-so, and it was eventually reported by so-and-so. And that chain is actually really important within the religion to measure the authority of one saying over another, and how important a thing is. And those hadiths are often used in the interpretation of the Quran. They're used to guide the Sharia, and definitely referred to when composing fatwas. And they're just the sayings of the Prophet, mostly things that didn't make it into the Quran for one reason or another, when the Quran was also not written by Muhammad, but also written by his companions, as they remembered what Muhammad had taught.
Now, the only other practice I can think of that we didn't touch on would be their religious service. Now we have Christians on Sunday and
the Jews on Saturday.
So Muslims get Friday. That is the day that they would typically go to the mosque to have their public worship.
Absolutely. There's another word that is also used sometimes instead of mosque. Masjid.
Oh, I've seen that word. I've just never...
Yeah, I think the nearby mosque actually says masjid before the name of it. So it's a reasonably common word that you might more likely see written out in public
Than spoken. I've only ever heard people say I'm wearing the mosque.
I've only ever heard the word masjid spoken when I was in New Jersey, where people would talk about going to the masjid, and nobody ever said mosque.
Oh, interesting.
But here we say mosque, and it seems to be a regional preference thing. It's
like
just
pencil crowns versus colored pencils.
Exactly. Because they are the same thing as far as I've been able to find.
Pencil crowns.
I mean, sure. Sure, why not?
Oh, you're talking about the mosque.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're pencil crayons here.
Yep. Now you know where we live based on what we call them.
And it's a toque, not a beanie.
Oh, they're narrowing us down. They're going to find us.
Oh, no. It's a hoodie, not a bunny hug.
Ooh, well, I mean, that just tells them we're not from Saskatchewan. But we know how to say Saskatchewan, so they know we're Canadian.
Right.
How about you tell us about the differences between Shia, Sunni, and Sufi Muslim?
All right. So most Muslims are Sunni. Sunni basically means traditional, following the 4 caliphs that were elected to take over leadership duties after Muhammad's death. The Sunni Muslims make up a little over 3/4 of all of the Muslim population.
So a lot of Muslims.
An awful lot of them.
Like probably 1.5 million then. No, my math is wrong.
Your math is wrong, but that's okay. I'm not going to worry about the exact
million.
numbers. Definitely more than 1 million.
Over 1 billion.
Yeah, it is more than 1 billion. There's several groups within Islam, and the Sunnis are the largest by a long shot. The second largest being the Shia. So Sunni Muslims, who make up the vast majority of the Islamic umbrella, if you will, are a lot more comfortable with democracy, that their leaders are elected, so they follow those caliphs who were elected following Muhammad's death. And so they're a lot more similar to what we're familiar with in the West, I think, than a lot of people give them credit for. They're also really concerned with the hadiths, those sayings recorded by the companions of Muhammad. And there's also 4 schools of legal thought within the Sunni tradition, each kind of having a friendly-ish competition with one another in a lot of the same way as the old Jewish Pharisees and rabbis, that they would argue an awful lot all the time about literally every point of law and understanding the value of scripture and determining how to live one's life. And having those arguments within the Sunni tradition isn't typically problematic. You just argue it out. And an argument could last generations as long as both sides are willing to continue defending their position using reliable and authoritative sources. The Shia tradition, named for those who followed Ali, who was Muhammad's son-in-law, they see him as his true divinely appointed successor. So a little less democratic there. But when you have somebody divinely appointed, it just makes sense that you follow him. So if you believe it, then that's the way you go. And the most visible feature of the Shia tradition that makes it different from the Sunni tradition is the need to put down everything that they do differently from the Shia tradition. It's super visible, but there's also a lot of anti-rejection rhetoric among Shia Muslims as well. I mean, just basically a lot of the scholars saying, don't be a dick. They're still Muslims, countering those people who say they're not good Muslims. Like you mentioned, the no true Scotsman fallacy. So often that's the deal with Islam. You can be a Muslim and disagree, and that's okay. You're not going to fit into the little cookie cutter every time. That's nonsense.
Right. Now, I know Sunnis pray 5 times a day, and Shias typically pray 3 times a day.
Yes, and they both always face Mecca. They agree on that.
That's good. Don't we all?
face towards Mecca when
I
they pray?
mean, yeah, we're pretty darn close. I mean,
You don't pray.
No,
and
that's
I
true.
don't make a point of facing one direction or the other,
I know,
so I don't
but
know what you mean.
Most churches faced east too, towards Jerusalem, and at that point,
That
when
is
you're
pretty
like
standard, you're right.
converging, like you're pretty basic. You're basically
At this distance
at
from
this
the Middle
distance.
East.
Yeah, if you were in Dubai, you'd be a little more specific, but
Yeah, the closer you are, the more you would have to vary between Jerusalem and
But
Mecca.
when you're this far away, we're all facing Mecca. I am literally facing east right now as we record this. So yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. I think if you point in any direction and go long enough, unless you've set it up exactly right.
No,
because you're always going to screw up and divert a little bit by a degree or another by your 100th step, that you're not going to make a perfect ring around the planet. At some point, you're going to hit Mecca.
Oh, okay. So you're saying.
I mean, you might take several laps, but
there's got to be some sort of online simulation for this.
Probably. If you occasionally vary by a degree, I think you'll eventually get there.
Like the screensavers where you like watch them and you just wait for it to hit the corner. Eventually it'll.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not good enough. You do actually have to face towards Mecca when you pray.
Yes. That was what the divergent there was, the tangent.
I brought us back. We're going to be okay.
Thank you. He got us to Mecca.
The Hajj is complete.
I don't think we count. You're not actually allowed in Mecca unless you're a Muslim.
That's right. And it's actually interesting that I've heard many Muslims use a much looser definition of what Islam is to describe people who don't subscribe to the Islamic faith as Muslims. For example, if I believe in Jesus, that's a pretty good step. If I want to be peaceable and worship the true God, there are Muslims who think that that's enough to call me a Muslim. But the guys guarding the doors at Mecca are not likely to be satisfied with that.
No.
They'll want to know that I believe Muhammad is a prophet, divinely called and inspired by God. And yeah, that's kind of the deal. There's a whole spectrum in Islam, just like there is in every other faith tradition. Another sizable enough for common people to know the name group within Islam is the Sufi tradition, which is a lot more interested in understanding both internal and mystical, I guess, portions of the universe and God and theology. It's not incompatible with either as far as I'm able to observe, but it's given its own label as being its own thing.
Ah, yes. A notable Sufi is Rumi, and he was known for his poetry and I guess commentary on Islam, and I was gifted.
I was looking at that tiny little book on your shelf.
Book of Rumi. Yeah, I was gifted that when I was in university and taking religious studies, and it's just got little poems and passages, but he was a Sufi mystic. So there, check it out. It's an easy little, like I said, it's just poetry on Islam. And there's little gems in there, and it's easy and non-committal. So yeah, he's a well-known Muslim Sufi mystic guy.
Yeah. And there's several much smaller groups in Islam, especially visible in North America. A lot of them come from traditions of African Americans. Remember callbacks of their grandparents talking about their religion before they were forced into slavery under Christians in air quotes. And so when they received their freedom, a lot of them reverted to a form of Islam that may not necessarily be recognizable to somebody who is part of one of the bigger traditions. But if they believe in God, that God is God, and that Muhammad was his prophet, that's the first step in that direction. So we have leaders like Louis Farrakhan, who has quite a sizable following in the United States as leading one of those sects. What else we got?
I think the last thing we have to cover is being Debbie Downers, because we really can't have an episode on Islam, and we'll go into greater detail in another episode, but we really can't talk about Islam without the rise of Islamophobia in our world, especially here in the West.
Especially in the last 20 years or so, after the Twin Tower attacks of 2001, we have seen a growing voice that occasionally wavers and quiets down, which is nice. But the sentiment is not gone yet that Islam is a terrible force in America.
It's a violent religion.
It's all nonsense. People are either violent or they're not. And I don't think religion has anything to do with it. About 100 years ago, the Ottoman Empire was one of many countries who lost the First World War. And they were splintered by the Allied governments to make sure that they would perpetually weaken themselves and each other by constant infighting. And the one thing they happen to share is the Islamic religion. And so it's easy to paint the enemy is Islamic. But that's a really terrible lens to look at it all through.
Mm-hmm.
And when they rise up and say, hey, we're tired of Americans screwing us over, so many people just see them as Muslims from the Middle East, when we could just say people from the Middle East are tired of Americans screwing them over.
We've had this conversation before. I think religion definitely exacerbates socioeconomic political issues. I don't think it makes it better. I think it's definitely fuel to a fire, because now it's a divinely sanctioned fight.
Well, and it validates the perspective of good versus evil in your conflict.
Yep. But that being said, you've also, every time I bring a religious conflict to you, you're like, no, here's the socioeconomic reason behind it. And I don't disagree. So there's a great podcast called The Road to 9/11, done by NPR, based off of a History Channel documentary. And it goes into how 9/11 was set in motion decades before the event actually happened. So, you know, if you talk to people in the 90s about what Islam was, most people couldn't even tell you, and it was already in motion. So I had a point to that, but it's gone.
It's not one thing that just popped up by a couple of Muslim extremists. It was political people motivated politically and trained by the American government to do the same thing to other governments. And all of that to have the effect of unifying some of America. It helps to have a common enemy, but to make a religion an enemy is nonsensical, in my opinion.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is, like, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, if you weren't scared of Muslims, which you shouldn't be, then why are you scared of them post 9/11? Because, like I said, it was already in motion. You're right. You can go as far back as the Ottoman Empire. So it's been in motion for a very long time. Yeah. So if you weren't scared of them before, why are you scared of them now? And
if you are scared of them, why aren't you scared of Christians? I mean,
also true.
Christians tend to be very awful to other Christians if they don't go to the same church. Not that it's a rule, but that's a thing that's super observable. And speaking on just in terms of terrorism, there's an awful lot more Christians bombing government buildings and medical stations than there
storming
are
capitals.
Right? There's a lot more of that than there is Muslims doing it.
And I mean, part of that could be
It's socioeconomic.
Right.
And
Muslims know in North America, not that they have any inclination to, but the repercussions are tenfold of what a brown Muslim would experience and what a white Christian would experience for any act of violence or terrorism. Right? I mean, we bombed the entire Middle East because of 9/11, but we've let tens of thousands of people die from coronavirus. So it's just,
it's a mad world.
It is a mad world. There's a song about that. I think if you view Christianity as peaceful, you have to view Islam as peaceful. I don't think it's fair to look at them through different lenses. There are peaceful chunks of the Bible and peaceful chunks of the Quran. There's violent chunks of the Bible and violent chunks of the Quran. And there's hateful Christians and hateful Muslims and hateful atheists. And there's loving Christians, Muslims, atheists, whatever, fill in the blank. Like Preston said, it's people in general.
People suck.
People are garbage, and you're going to find garbage people in every group.
But with any luck, you'll find the good ones in every group too.
And
if you're willing to look.
If you're willing to look. And I would, if you're feeling wary or concerned about Muslims in your community, I would just encourage you to have conversations with them. And a mosque would be more than happy to have you for an afternoon and teach you some stuff and show you around. But if that's too far out of your comfort zone, then find someone in your community, if that's a bank teller, or library worker, or whomever that is accessible to you. They're happy to answer questions. And that's where most of my knowledge on Islam, obviously we've done a lot of supplementary reading, but a lot of my foundational Islam is just from asking friends questions about their lives and what they believe and why they do what they do. And they will give you the best answers, and they're happy to teach and feed you too.
Yeah. Honestly, most people are happy to feed you if you're willing to talk to them for any length of time and not be a dick about it.
I mean, yeah, I think people love to talk about themselves. So if you go in with an open mind, then you'll learn some good things.
Absolutely. I want to lean into some positive things before we close out.
Absolutely.
Now that we've actually had a little downer moment.
Oh.
That there's a lot of great things that Islam has brought to us that I alluded to as we just opened up. That mathematics.
Math. I hate math, but we need it.
We use Arabic numerals in math, and it's not just because they took over a huge chunk of Europe ages ago. It's because their numbers are way more sensible and way more useful for math than the Roman numerals and even the Greek number system that used their alphabet and the Hebrew number system that used their alphabet. The Arabics came up with numbers that are super easy to look at and do math real quickly instead of counting out what 4 X's and a V.
45. Yeah, so if you're super Islamophobic and are get back to your country kind of person, please go back to using Roman numerals, or else you're a poser.
I love it.
It bothers me to no end if you're like,
I don't want to be forced to learn Arabic numerals. No, that's what you were forced to learn growing up. That's already happened. It's mysterious to me that Arabic has actually developed a different set of numerals that is now commonly used as opposed to what we're familiar with now. But what we use is the Arabic number set.
Okay, this is why I found it.
Oh, that's a lot more curls on the 9 than I was expecting when you said it.
Bomb. So I don't know. This is like a super fun fact, and Preston Lane called me out on it earlier. But Arabic numerals are super cool because the number of angles is the number. So the 1 you have to draw it the correct way. But the 1, if you draw it with the little hand on top, has 1 angle, and a 2, if you draw it, this picture is like a Z, but some people curve or curl it. It's got 2 angles, and a 3 has 3 angles, and a 4, you have to draw the sailboat 4 though. the closed 4, has 4 angles, and the 5 has 5 angles. It's like super cool. It makes me so happy.
Now that I see it, I'm far more willing to accept it.
And you have to draw the 7 with the cross and the foot. Like, so there's
A whole foot.
Yeah, so like we've gotten lazy in how we draw things or stylized in how we draw things as someone who likes fonts. But the original way of drawing was that it was based off of the angles in the number. It's just
It's
really
pretty
cool.
intuitive.
Put it in your back pocket. That's your trivia for this week with your family.
Yeah. And also, early Christians really had no interest in the Greek classics. I'm not sure why that's the case. Modern Christians seem to love them, but they were almost completely buried by the Christians. And Muslim scholars were way ahead of the Christians of their time. And that's true in many cases throughout history. And we can thank Muslim scholars for the Greek classics that we enjoy today, including the Homeric poems.
Islam definitely had there's like a word for it, like a high period, an enlightened period.
And it was way before the European
Way
Enlightenment
before
period.
everyone else. And we owe so much science and math, in particular, astronomy too, to Islamic culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then also really cool art, as
And
we
then
mentioned
Europeans
earlier.
said, go away.
And then we said, go away. And then the Holy War started.
And the Dark Ages and the Crusades. An awful lot of fighting, because much like the Bush era dick measuring,
Oh my.
there was
This is why I make our episodes
huge-
explicit.
there was a huge problem of white people who thought that they were superior for some reason, saying, we're not comfortable with these smart brown folk.
Also,
And
Jesus was brown.
that mindset is still very common in some parts of America. But yeah, Islam has brought us all kinds of great things, and I don't think they can be blamed for even half of the awful things that people like to blame them for. So I'm going to celebrate Islam as one of those religions that's worth preserving.
Wow.
Not that we have any power to do otherwise.
Right? I mean, neither of us are Muslim, so we're not actually helping the cause. But, and I arguably don't want any religion preserved. But I see you seeing the merits.
People have to grow up with some sort of moral teaching. They have to grow up with some sort of moral teaching.
I turned out just fine. I had
You
moral
had moral
teaching.
teaching.
His name was Mr. Rogers.
I'm okay with that.
He was a pastor.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway.
I didn't know that, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah. So that concludes the Abrahamic religions that we've talked about. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam. We are going to spend the next 4 episodes covering, air quotes, Eastern religions. As you know from past episodes, we don't
like
love that
label.
term. So we will be starting with Hinduism in 2 weeks' time, and then Buddhism, Sikhism, and Shintoism. And that will cover all the big ones. And then we can dive into some more gritty topics once we're all on the same footing for the world's religions. If you like what you're listening to,
Follow us
follow us.
on Instagram and Facebook. Feel free to email us.
Become a loyal congregant at Holy Watermelon Pod for Instagram and Facebook, and holywatermelonpod@gmail.com.
If you want to email us.
If you want to email us,
Send us your hate mail.
concerns, suggestions, commentary, hate mail.
Join the conversation.
Join the conversation. We'll read your email on air.
Yeah, I would love to.
Also, if you have stuck with us this long, please share this with a friend. If all of you share with a friend, we can double our listeners and put out more great content.
Thanks for joining us.
Peace be with you.
And salvation called
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.
God is near.